John Muir once said, "Between every two pine trees, there is a new way of life. Climb the mountains and get their good tidings. Nature's peace will flow into you as sunshine into trees." Protected is our land that contains millions of acres of wild landscapes and historic sites. Our trees are amongst the tallest in the world, and we are home to thousands of different species of plants and animals. We have caves that stretch miles long and volcanoes with mass amounts of lava that rise dangerously high. Our lakes are some of the deepest in the world, and our trails were once trekked upon by our ancestors. We are America's national parks. Our national parks were some of the most untouched lands that existed. For years, natives and trappers hunted and lived in these lands. Streams with abundances of fish and a variety of game available provided to be attractive features. Before the Civil War, only a handful of people had explored these areas. In 1871, Ferdinand Hayden, an American geologist, led a scientific expedition to the Yellowstone region with a team of photographers, artists, botanists, and support staff. This expedition caught Congress's attention, and on March 1st, 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act into law. This act was largely put in place to keep the Yellowstone Valley from settlement and also designated care of Yellowstone to the state of California. This made Yellowstone America's first and largest national park. John Muir, a Scottish American, also known as Father of the National Parks, was another icon in national park history. He arrived in California in the late 1800s and lived as a year-round mountain dweller in the Yosemite Valley. He worked as a shepherd and later ran a sawmill, but while he worked, he studied and explored the vast nature around him. Muir grew concerned about this land's protection. He went on to write and publish 2 detailed essays about Yosemite, and he presented his argument for preservation. John Muir believed that national parks and forests should be preserved entirely and that their resources should be off limits for industrial purposes. His essays later appeared in the Century magazine, and on September 25, 1890, Congress signed a bill to approve Sequoia National Park, and on October 1st signed another bill establishing Yosemite National Park. During the early 1900s, there was an emerging distinction between national forests and parks, but there was no federal bureau designated to managing these areas. Richard Watrous, Secretary of the American Civic Association, introduced a resolution to this by proposing the National Parks Bureau to put a systematic policy in place. A campaign had also begun at the time to establish Rocky Mountain National Park, as Estes Park and Long Peak had become increasingly popular tourist destinations. A resident from Estes was actually the one to propose the national park because he realized that forest reserves could not provide the necessary protection that the area needed. In 1915, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Rocky Mountain National Park Act, and in 1916 signed another act establishing the National Park Service to consolidate the management of these areas under one agency. Motives for preservation were widespread at the time, and to some, these areas were a place where man could come to find peace with nature or to just simply enjoy the scenery. But for others, these areas were a place of scientific exploration and a way to reap economic opportunity. Preserving the wilderness was not a main concern for Congress at the time, but rather their concern was that the lands were too wild for people to enjoy. Historians have argued about when preservation came into thinking because earlier legislation did not mention anything about the wilderness. By the mid-1900s, the number of visitors was growing, and with the arrival of the automobile, motor touring and car camping were becoming popular. The parks overflowed with tourists and soon the National Park Service began to work with highway engineers to develop new designs, construction, and road management. This development brought on the creation of some of our park's most famous drives, including Skyline Drive in Shenandoah National Park, Going to the Sun Road in Glacier National Park, and the Zion Mount Carmel Highway in Zion National Park. Visitors in the parks, aside from wanting more campgrounds, restrooms, and other facilities, also wanted a way to better understand the ecology, geology, and other natural resources and systems within the park. It was then that the National Park Service established a professional corps of park rangers to perform duties of teachers, paramedics, law enforcement officers, and more. There have been a total of 63 national parks established to date, including Great Smoky Mountains National Park on the border between North Carolina and Tennessee, Glacier National Park in Montana, and Crater Lake National Park in Oregon. To qualify as a national park, the area must meet certain criteria, such as having unusual ecosystems, a wide range of recreational activities, and an extraordinary region of beauty. Tourism has become a threat to the parks, adding to the depletion of natural resources, changing the ecosystem, and creating more pollution. Wildlife is also being disrupted as tourists crowd these facilities, and as facilities are being built in natural areas. Recognizing this threat, the National Park Service continues to look for new ways to accommodate the number of tourists and limit the amount of environmental impact. Angel's Landing, for example, in Zion National Park in Utah, is considered one of the most famous hikes in the world. It requires the use of chains to scramble up sandstone cliffs and has steep drops on either side. In August of this year, the National Park Service announced that a permit would be needed to hike up Angel's Landing and would be chosen via a lottery system. Since 2000, 13 people have died on this hike, and up to 1,000 people per day have tried to make their way up. Safety and allowing people to enjoy the hike rather than having to worry about crowds was the main reason for implementing the lottery system. Rocky Mountain National Park also has a temporary timed entry reservation system in place that was put in place at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our national parks provide us with so many opportunities: a place to escape, a place to meet people from all over the world, and a place to call home. So much of America's history lies within these parks, and although time continues to pass, our parks are a visual reminder of what our country once was. So next time you visit a national park, take some time to appreciate that these places still exist. Climb a boulder, camp under the stars, watch the sunrise over the mountains, and you may just find yourself along the way.